Welcome to my online video lecture about nonverbal communication. My name is Rachel. For those of you that don't know me, I'm one of the graduate teaching assistants. Let's jump in. So today we're going to talk about what nonverbal communication is, the differences and interconnectedness of nonverbal and verbal communication, types of nonverbal cues, and nonverbal competence. To begin, nonverbal communication is how we share meaning with others without using words. This definition includes tone of voice, gestures, facial expressions, manner of dress, and we'll get into all of those later. Variation in these modes of nonverbal communication communicates different things. And while there is overlap between verbal and nonverbal communication, let's talk about some of the distinctions. First, nonverbal communication is multi-channeled, while verbal communication is single-channeled. This means when you are communicating nonverbally, there are multiple ways to communicate the same message. For example, if I wanted to show someone I didn't like them, I could glare at them or shake my fist at them, scream, whisper menacingly, take the Andy Bernard route, and punch a hole in the wall. These channels add impact and believability to the message. Next, nonverbal communication is as ambiguous, if not more ambiguous, than verbal communication. It is difficult to discern when someone is lying using their nonverbals because there isn't a clear sign of deceit. And cultural meanings add another layer of ambiguity to deciphering nonverbal communication because nonverbals are perceived in different ways. So in our culture, we tend to believe that when someone is lying, they avert their eyes, they can't maintain eye contact. However, in other cultures, it's seen as rude to maintain eye contact, and it's offensive and not related to lying at all. Suffice it to say, we cannot read people like a book, even though we think we can. Lastly, nonverbal communication is continuous. It literally never ends. Unlike verbal communication, which starts and stops or has discrete beginnings and endings. Even when we think we may be communicating nothing, the lack of eye contact or gestures can indicate relaxation, dislike, or distraction. So, for example, if I were giving this lecture to you in person and I looked out among the audience and I saw your eyes glazed over or no one nodding their head when I made points and no one answering my questions, I would perceive that to mean that you're bored, disinterested, or tired. On the other hand, you may just be listening, but that lack of nonverbal communication still sends me a message. So next we're going to watch this video from Friends that does a really good job of showing nonverbal communication.
I'm pregnant. And you're the father, by the way? But you got it.
No, I could get him to forgive us.
I don't know.
I'm telling you. I can do it.
Yeah, he can do it.
It's like you're always stuck in second gear.
It was like this crazy-eyed, hairy beast man. He was like a Bigfoot or a Yeti or something. Hi, just so you know, we didn't mean to fog you. We actually thought you were like a Yeti or something. Hi.
So you like the short hair better?
What? Yeti? Danny?
When it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your year, but
Babes? Hello?
I've earned your breakfast so far. Things are going great. Your mother warned you there'd be days like these.
Let's put aside the fact that you accidentally picked up my grandmother's ring and you accidentally proposed to Rachel. When people do this, I don't really know what that means. I'm sorry.
So like I said, this video does a really good job of showing the different functions of nonverbal communication, including how people perceive you when you dress differently, how to use space to communicate something, how nonverbals can emphasize a verbal message, like when Joey uses eye contact to convince Ross that he can convince Chandler to forgive them. The friends' nonverbal cues did a lot to emphasize and aid their verbal messages. So now let's take a look at how that works. There are 5 main ways that nonverbal and verbal communication work in conjunction with each other to impact the reception of a message. First, repetition is the act of communicating the same message using different channels. This could look like saying yes and nodding the head, saying I love you, and then hugging or kissing somebody. The repetition of the message through different channels increases the clarity and credibility of the message. Next, we have accentuation. Nonverbals have the ability to intensify and emphasize verbal messages. Some examples include emphasizing words like "Don't you ever say that," or "What is wrong with you?" It can also look like "Stop." See, when I yelled and slammed my hand on the table, I physically accentuated my message. I increased my volume. I changed my tone to illustrate how serious or angry I am. The third connection is substitution, where no words are necessary to communicate a message. A student yawning in class indicates boredom or tiredness. I can shake my head side to side like this, and you know I'm communicating no. Flirting is also largely nonverbal and doesn't require words to show our interest in another person through things like prolonged eye contact, smiles, crossing our legs toward the person that we're interested in, and doing our best to remain in close proximity with them. Next, regulation uses nonverbal cues to manage verbal conversation. For example, turn-taking in a conversation is initiated by long pauses at the end of a sentence and using eye contact at the end of sentence to indicate to the other person that it's their turn to speak. In a classroom setting, turn-taking and conversation is regulated by students holding up their hands to speak and the teacher calling on them. Last, let's look at contradiction. This occurs when the nonverbal cues contradict the verbal message and indicate which is the exact opposite of repetition. So for example, yeah, sure, I believe you. Even though I'm verbally saying I believe you, the lack of eye contact, my flat monotone, indicates the opposite. Therefore, it's difficult for you to trust what I mean and what I'm saying. So that does it for this first chunk of the lecture. Stay tuned for the next chunk.